Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So before we begin our class for today, are there any questions from the previous week you didn't get answered? Before your exam, you'd like to get them answered? Yes. Yes. Good question. So what level of responsibility do we have as individual consumers when the sign says halal on a box or in a restaurant or whatever it may be? There's two aspects. One of them is the individual responsibility in terms of feeding your family, feeding yourself, and buying meat. You just need to you have to have some level of trust, not to go to the level of paranoia when it comes to something being labeled halal. Even though you know that there is abuse of these standards, and you know that there are issues in practices, halal practices. So in terms of your individual responsibility, you should try to have a fair amount of trust. Don't be excessive. So just as long as, like, if you see a sign that says halal, for example, and then you see a box coming into the restaurant which has a Oscar Mayer label or something like that, right? You say, well, what's going on? Something's going on here. So then what do you do in that case? Do you say, well, no, because it says halal, I'm not even going to take this into consideration. If you actually see a box, you see something wrong, then you have a responsibility to investigate. If you see something which looks that it could be suspicious, but it's not really suspicious, then you don't have a responsibility to investigate. Okay, so you really have to just as an individual, you have to kind of weigh it. And what the percentage is, if you have a 50% or more doubt, then you have to investigate it. And if your doubt is less than 50%, you're not required to investigate it. If you wanted to, you could, but you're not required. If your doubt is really small, like a 2% doubt or a 1% doubt, then you should not investigate it, because that means you're becoming paranoid. And I'll give you an example. For example, I was in Mecca, and I bought some marshmallows in the Mecca Hilton Hotel, literally right in front of the Haram, And I said, this is my opportunity to just enjoy everything. And then I was just looking through, I'm like, it's so nice, everything is halal, I'm eating the marshmallows and everything. And then I just look at the package, and I'm just eating my marshmallows, enjoying myself, and just looking at the package. And the package says, this came from like France or some other European country. I said, okay, that's interesting, but of course, I'm sure there's regulation. They would never allow just gelatin in there. And then I'm just reading the thing, and it says that there's gelatin in there. So I was shocked. I said, this must be kosher gelatin. It has to be. There's no way it can't be. So then when I investigate a little bit, I didn't, I was a kid, but I investigate a little bit, there was actually no regulation. This is something that kind of got slipped through, right? And they're selling it right in Mecca. So the thing is, when you get to that level where it says, look, I know that there should be a K before the word gelatin is written, or I know that there should be a OUD symbol for the Jewish symbol or something like that. There should be some kind of kosher standard, and it's not there, and it's not coming from Saudi Arabia, then there's a room for doubt. And then it's best to leave it. But if it was a product of Saudi Arabia and then it said gelatin, you just assume they know what they're doing, right? Even if it's a country that's not so practicing, like let's say Tunisia at that time, right? You still assume the best, right? Even though hijab is banned, it was banned in Tunisia, you still assume the best. But if it's coming from somewhere else, you're like, something's wrong with this, then you leave it. Now as a group, so that's your individual responsibility. As a group, if you know that some of these things are going on in the community, like one of the markets, one of the restaurants, that was sued very recently, and that's just one of them who got caught. And there are several, it's a fact that there are several other ones who are doing some shady stuff. As a community, you have an obligation, the way you have an obligation towards the people of Syria, you have an obligation towards the people of Egypt, you have an obligation towards the people of Burma. When there's a community event going on, when there's someone trying to organize something, you should try to do something as part of that cause to fix the halal industry. So that's your collective responsibility, and you should also be part of that. So we're actually going to be doing an event very soon in the next month or two about the halal industry, particularly in California, inshallah. So that's individual obligation and this community obligation, inshallah. Good question. The virtues of eating halal, let's talk about the dangers of eating haram first of all, right? Is more important. Virtues of eating halal is that, you're obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? The harms and the dangers of not eating halal are that your dua, your supplications will not be accepted. Okay? Some scholars have mentioned specific times and days and everything, but there's a hadith in Bukhari which clearly stipulates this. A man was praying, he was disheveled, which means he was, traveling, clothes are all messed up, he's poor, he doesn't have too much money, and he's asking Allah and crying, asking Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ says, and his clothing is from a haram source, his wealth is from a haram source, and he's fed, he's satiated from haram sources. How is Allah going to answer his supplication? So one of the things that's very clear cut is if you engage in eating unlawful food, your supplications are not going to be answered as well. This I think should be sufficient, but also there are other reasons. But this is one of the main things. So and of course, and you're disobeying Allah, obviously. So again, of course, this is taking all the difference of opinion into consideration as well. But we should try and have a good balanced standard of what we take. Okay? Yes. No? Okay, let's begin then. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So today we're going to be talking about, grooming and dress. It's part of human nature to cover our nakedness and to actually wear clothing. Even though some theorists stipulate that the earliest humans didn't wear clothes, when we look at all societies, they always had some type of clothing there. So clothing is there for us to cover our nakedness and also for adornment purposes. So it's like food, right? Remember we talked about food? You need food to survive, and the food is also there so that it tastes good and you enjoy it. Same thing with clothing. It's there to cover yourself, and it's also there as a sign of, as a way of adorning yourself, a way of beautifying yourself. So, given that, it's a blessing from Allah, and it's a necessity that we as human beings need, but there are also certain guidelines that Allah has prescribed with regards to our dress, to help us function in society correctly, and also with regards to our body, which are going to be for our own benefit. So this is grooming. So when it comes to grooming, let's look at some of the issues. Taking a bath, for example, or shower, right? At minimum, Islam has stipulated that at minimum, you have to take a bath at least every 7 days. Right? Now, living in America, most of you probably don't need to be reminded of that fact. But if you lived in a rural area, or you were on a journey, or you were somewhere, you have to remember that whenever you get an opportunity, you have to take a bath at least every 7 days. But it's actually recommended to take it on a regular basis whenever you need to clean yourself. So if you're working really hard, or you're sweating, or whatever it is, you're supposed to be taking a bath. So generally, you're going to be taking a lot more than one bath per week. But this is the bare minimum for someone who either is not married, is not forced to take a bath in order to pray, and someone who maybe there's a scarcity of water or something. These circumstances apply. Okay, and there will be circumstances maybe in your life, probably not most of you, but if you ever encounter these, there may be circumstances. There's been a circumstance where it happened to me one time. I had to go over 7 days because there was no water. Right? So in our area, so we couldn't do it. One of my friends, he was in the deserts of Mauritania. He went 3 weeks without taking a shower because there was no water. They were making tayammum the entire time. So sometimes it's not possible. But usually, if it's possible and there's water, it should never exceed 7. But 7 is just like an extreme limit nowadays. We should do this a lot more often. It's recommended to clean yourself on a regular basis. When it comes to underarm and pubic hair, and this is really important because a lot of Muslims, they're not taught this. So they don't know this. I wouldn't say for some reason. They're not taught this, so how are they supposed to know? It is a requirement. It is absolute requirement to trim, shave, or pluck the underarm hair and the pubic hair. And this applies for males and females. Okay? What does this do? It actually helps prevent the buildup of bacteria. It's very hygienic. and it's very, it's a good thing. Surprisingly, there's actually a debate about this now. It's becoming more fashionable in Western culture to do that, and that has to do with the reasons of intimacy and all of that. But there's actually a debate saying that we shouldn't do it. And I found this, online. People are saying that no, we have to be natural. So this is a problem with the whole natural craze. That the concept of being green and natural and everything, there's a lot of good in that. But when it's taken to the extreme, then we lose some of the benefits or some of the Islamic ordinances here. So we have to be very careful about what we consider to be what's quote unquote natural. So Islam has taught us that we should be removing this, because this is where a lot of that bacteria and stuff gathers, so this is a lot cleaner. The maximum, or let's talk about fingernails first. And the finger and toenails should also be trimmed. And they should be trimmed enough to prevent dirt from building up in them. So generally if you leave your nails quite long, then you see the dirt starts building up. So even if you'll be removing the dirt, you want to make sure that it's not going to be building up in the first place. So you try to trim your fingernails as much so that they're not going to be building up the dirt. The maximum in which you can leave your underarm and pubic hair and nails is 40 days. And you should never exceed 40 days. So somebody recently asked me the question that what about trimming? What if you don't actually cut all the way and you're just trimming a little bit of the hair? Well, if you were to remove all of it and wait 40 days, you have to make sure that you're always trimming that it's less than that amount. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies it. Now it's recommended to do this every week or every other week, or whatever it may be, but 40 days is the maximum. You should never allow it to exceed this length of time. Okay, men are required to grow a beard. Okay, men are required to grow a beard, according to the vast majority of scholars, and they are also required to trim their mustache because it's the distinguishing mark of a believer. Okay, and the mustache, the definition of what a beard is that it's the hair that grows on the chin and the hair that grows on the jawbones. The jawbones and the chin. Okay, so whatever hair is growing in that region, that's generally what the beard is considered. There have been a few scholars who defined it as being the chin only, not the jawbones. But the vast majority have said the jawbones as well as the chin. All the other parts in terms of the cheeks, this area, in terms of the under neck area and all of that, this is generally not considered to be part of the beard, so that can be either trimmed or shaved or whatever it may be. And the mustache should be trimmed or must be trimmed before it starts to grow over the lip. And the reason why that is for purposes of cleanliness, obviously, because otherwise food will be getting mixed with the mustache, and also because that is what the disbelievers used to do. Right? Now the question is, because the circumstances have changed, you don't find too many disbelievers, like India you do, for example. Other places you do, but you don't find too many people doing that. Does the ruling change? And the answer is the ruling doesn't change, according to the majority of scholars, because it still serves the purpose of an identity. So if you look at Muslim sisters, when we're going to be talking about hijab, hijab serves a required purpose of protecting modesty and chastity, and it also serves as a purpose of identity. So when it comes to brothers, the beard is like the identity that the sisters have with their hijab as well. And it's probably a lot easier to keep than the sisters to wear hijab in this community. So some people have an issue. They say, no, it's going to be very difficult. People are going to look at me or something like that. I think it's more difficult probably for the sisters to be wearing hijab than it is for men to be growing the beard. So they're required to grow a beard. Some scholars, however, have had a different opinion, but the vast majority have said this. Men and women should not resemble each other when it comes to their grooming practices. So, except the ones we've already talked about, right? So what does that mean? And all of this depends on local customs. So what does that mean? So for example, a woman shaving her head or cutting her hair very short, right? If that's something that's specifically characteristic to men in a certain community, then she should not be doing that. Right? But if it's not specifically characteristic to men in a particular society, then it wouldn't be a problem. Okay? So it really depends on the society, and we're talking about society meaning what's considered normal in society, right? What, I hate to keep quoting the same person again, but what Miley Cyrus does with her hair does not define what is considered normal in a community, right? What Sinead O'Connor does by shaving her head is not what defines a society as being considered to be normal, all right? So, am I the only one who knows these people? Okay, I'm just wondering. All right, so all questions will be at the end, inshallah. All questions at the end. So just keep that in mind. So so this applies to women shaving their head, and it also applies to men growing long hair. So it depends again on the society. So if the society doesn't have this thing about men specifically having this type of hair or whatever it is, then it's considered to be not resembling women. But there may be another society where only women do that, and this is what's considered to be normal. You should always take this society into consideration, okay? Because the prohibition is to resemble a woman, or a woman resembling a man. And that depends on society. So you have to take the society into consideration, and you have no obligation to try to change the society into a certain way of what you consider to be normal. So for example, now I'm going to talk about this. For example, if you think that now things have changed, but let's say 30 years ago, right? Women wore 2 earrings. If a man wore 2 earrings, say, this is what women do. Now, if you were to go to some random place in, let's say, some place in Africa, or you go to Madagascar or something like that, and it just so happened that the people there, the men are wearing the 2 earrings and the women are not wearing any earrings. You are under no obligation to go and try and change that and say, what's wrong with these people? And if the woman started wearing earrings in that custom, and she wore 2 and it's only for men, she's not allowed to wear the earrings in that custom. So I hope that's clear. It is prohibited to permanently change the shape of your body or scar your body through plastic surgery or by getting tattoos. Okay, permanent tattoos, not temporary henna tattoos. However, if the surgery is there to correct a type of deformity or to bring the shape of your body back to what it would have normally been, right, then it's considered to be allowed, because you're just bringing it back to what's considered to be natural in the first place, according to your genetic makeup and your custom and all of that. It is permitted, It is permitted for a person to wear a wig, okay, or use hair extensions. That's a very common question. As long as they're not intended to deceive somebody else, like deceiving a future spouse when you don't have hair and you're pretending like you have it or whatever it may be. And as long as it's not made from human hair. Okay, so I'm still researching this issue, but this is the safer opinion. It's not made from human hair. So if it's made from artificial hair or there are hair extensions or whatever, that's going to be fine. And if you want in the Q&A, I can explain why some scholars believe that it's not permitted, but it actually is permitted. I can explain that later. If a woman has lost all her hair, then she can also use human hair as a wig to return herself back to its natural state. Okay, so if somebody goes through chemotherapy or whatever, using artificial hair or natural hair can both be used, because it's like plastic surgery in the sense that you're bringing it back to its natural state, and this is an exception to the rule because of the illness. So it becomes an exception. It's not the standard. When it comes to hair dye, it is permissible to dye your hair and your beard or other parts of the hair any color. You can dye it any color. And you're even allowed to change gray hairs back to whatever color they were before. Now there's 1 or 2 schools that say that you should avoid using black, but that was specific to a group of people or specific to a particular person. I can talk more about that. So to demonstrate this, but obviously this, keep in mind, you should always take the culture in mind. So actually we were going to demonstrate this practically, where actually we were going to have Sheikh Faqih go with blonde highlights and I was going to go with some red highlights, just to show you that it's permissible. Then we decided to avoid that, and we're just going to teach it instead. We're just going to mention it in class instead. He didn't like the whole, blonde highlight thing in his hair, so we skipped that idea. But otherwise, it is permissible to dye your hair because you're not permanently changing the creation of Allah. So let's move on to clothing. That's grooming. So clothing, there are general rules when it comes to clothing. It's important to wear modest clothing. What is modest clothing? Modest clothing is that type of clothing that's going to be preventing unwanted attraction or unwanted advances. Because you don't want people to be hitting on you just for no reason, or flirting with you or something like that. Even if you feel good about that, this is not what Islam deems to be something good for society as a whole. Wearing clothing that resembles the opposite gender is prohibited. And again, that is culturally dependent. It depends on your custom and your culture. So for example, in our culture, to wear a suit and a tie to work is something that men do. Now, if a woman decides, until our culture has changed yet, woman decides, I'm going to wear exactly the same kind of suit and the same type of tie that my CEO and my bosses are wearing, and I'm going to wear that to work, this is considered to be imitation of men, and it's prohibited in Islam. Likewise, if a guy decides to dress and wear a skirt, or a mini skirt, or whatever it is, and he'd go to work with a blouse and a skirt, that's considered to be, we say, well, I'm covering what needs to be covered. Even if he's covering what needs to be covered, this is considered imitation of women in that particular culture, and therefore it's prohibited. Likewise, wearing any clothing or dress which is specific to non-Muslims, specific to disbelievers, is prohibited. So if you're wearing something that people who are not Muslim wear, and it's particular to them, then you're not allowed to wear that. For example, if you decide to wear your hijab, women decide to dress up like a nun, right? And they say, I'm going to use the black and white and similar style of a nun, but I'm wearing better hijab than most other sisters. So therefore, what's the problem? The problem is that type of clothing is specific to that religion. Therefore, it's a sign of imitating that religion, and therefore it wouldn't be allowed. If, for example, a man comes and he starts wearing the collar, I know I get criticized for these collars all the time, but if I was wearing this collar with the same color, and then I had the little white, what is that thing called? Anyone know the actual name of it? I forgot. My pastor friends used to tell me what it is, I forgot. So that little thing that goes through, the white thing, that actually symbolizes something. So if we were to wear that, that would be prohibited for Muslims to wear that, Muslim men to wear that, because that's specific to Christians. Another example would be, I read that Hindu priests, or some type of religion in India, their priests wear saffron dyed clothing. That's specific to them. So we're not allowed to wear that. If you take a look at the style of garments that Orthodox Christian priests wear, you see them sometimes in the airports and all of that. Very nice, actually quite stylish in my opinion. Very nice looking, loose clothing and everything. But if you were to wear exactly that with the rope as the belt around it, that's specific to them and it's identification of their religion. Therefore, it would not be permissible for us to do that. But when it comes to pants and shirts and skirts and maybe even neckties, not even maybe, neckties, despite the fact that I personally don't like them, but you don't let your feelings get involved in the actual ruling. So wearing those type of things are more of a universal style of clothing, and they're not particular to any type of religion, therefore they're not prohibited. And wearing a cross obviously would also apply, something along those lines. You should neither exaggerate in being too harsh nor exaggerate in being too soft. I remember before I came to this masjid, when I gave a khutbah about 4 or 5 years ago, I had an MP3 recorder. And I've had the MP3 recorder right here. MP3 recorder had a volume up, volume down button, and a fast forward and a rewind button. And it happened to be in the shape of a cross, but it was a symmetrical cross, not like the Christian cross where one side is longer. And 2 brothers came to me and just slammed me. I can't believe, we allowed this guy who's imitating the non-Muslims with a cross up there. He's going to be giving a khutbah. I mean, this is really ridiculous. There was a question on a website. Somebody says, you know what? On my cell phone that we have, they have a cross built in there. It's a sign of the Christianity. That's imitation of the disbelievers. And the Shaykh, alhamdulillah, smart Shaykh, he responded. He said, brother, that shows you the signal of the antenna for your cell phone. So not everything that you see that looks like a cross is necessarily a cross. Alright, so we need to be a little bit not too paranoid about it, and of course not too lax about it at the same time. Leather. So why is leather an issue? Because leather comes from animals, except natural leather, not synthetic leather. So leather comes from animals. And if an animal is not slaughtered correctly, and the blood doesn't drain out, it's considered to be carrion, which is dead meat. And the dead meat and the carrion is considered to be impure. So are we allowed to wear leather? And the answer is yes. Because the process of making the leather actually purifies the dead meat or the carrion in order to make it allowed. And the Prophet made this very, very clear. Now the only question is, does pig leather also get purified through the tanning process? And the majority of scholars have said no, it does not. So the process, because it's removing all the humidity, all the blood, it basically takes out all of the impurities. Because the impurity was due to the blood and due to the humidity and due to all of these other aspects. So all of that's removed, so therefore it's going to be considered pure again. But does it apply to a pig, even though the same process is being used? Majority of scholars have said no, because they say the pig is specifically prohibited without any direct underlying reason. There are wisdoms of why we know, but the underlying reason of every single part of the pig is something that we cannot figure out. However, there have been two scholars, Ibn Hazm and one of the students of Imam Abu Hanifa. I think it was Abu Yusuf, if I recall correctly. One of his two best students, he said even it applies to pig. So I would say it's best to avoid, because this is not a really fashionable thing anyways in our community. It's not very popular. Very rarely do you find pig leather in terms of clothing. Now, we discussed before, pig leather in terms of using a football or touching a football or something along those lines. It's different because you're not actually wearing it. Right? It's different because you're not wearing it, number one. It's dry, number two. And even if it were to become wet, it's tanned to the extent that the impurity cannot, even if it's impure in itself, it cannot transfer over to your hand. Right? You can grab a football and it can be raining, and there's no actual, part of that pig leather that's going to be transferring over to your hand. It's completely different. But wearing it over your body while you're praying, something different. Okay? That's leather. Local custom, this is really important. Local custom should always be taken into consideration whenever you're determining what kind of clothing is appropriate or inappropriate. So for example, and this is all based upon certain ahadith, I'm just clarifying the interpretations for you. A person who drags his clothes on the ground, okay, and somebody who has their garment, for example, fall below their ankles. At a certain time in history, the time during the Prophet, peace be upon him, in Arabia, that was considered to be a sign of pride or a sign of extravagance, and in other places as well. The dragging particularly was considered to be a sign of pride and extravagance. If the same thing applies in a certain society, then the same prohibition is going to apply. The same thing does not apply in a society, then it's not going to be considered to be in the same boat. So for example, if you go to high schools and you see people sagging their pants, and their pants are like all the way down, like dragging on the floor completely. Why do people sag their pants? Fashion, and within the fashion, what's involved? Is there any arrogance involved in sagging pants? Yeah, to show coolness. There's a sign of arrogance. In my opinion, there's a sign of arrogance when you're sagging your pants, especially when they're really, really low. Right? So therefore, that sign of pride will still be there. If you are working for just a normal company, and the executive dress happens to be wearing pants, like dress pants, and they happen to be going below the ankles down to the feet, is that considered to be a sign of arrogance? That all the employees are all wearing those pants due to their arrogance? Generally, no. I would say no. So therefore, that doesn't apply on this ruling. Okay, so that changes. Another example is covering a person's head. So covering your head with either a cap or a turban or something along those lines for males, that in many cultures was considered to be a norm. And if you didn't cover your head, and still today in many cultures, if you don't cover your head, it's considered to be a sign of disrespect. Anywhere where there is a culture that actually has that norm there, the norm should be taken into consideration. And you should be covering your head if you're in a place where it's considered disrespectful to uncover your head. But if you're in a place where that norm is not there, you have no Islamic obligation to change the culture and to make it match to another culture, even if it was the culture of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? Because they used to wear turbans. So we're under no obligation to change the culture of, let's say, the people of Pakistan or Malaysia to make them start wearing turbans. We're not under that obligation, even though that's what they used to do. So it was considered disrespectful or unmanly, just to clarify. Not only disrespect, it was considered unmanly. So it's a sign of masculinity to actually cover your head. There are no specific prohibitions on what kind of color clothing you can wear or what kind of styles of clothing you can wear. And that applies for men and women, as long as what we're going to be talking about, the general requirements are met. So in terms of color, there's no specific color that men have to wear. There's no specific color that women have to wear. And in terms of style, there's no specific style that your clothing has to be this way or has to be cut this way or has to have this sew or whatever it is. As long as it meets the requirements of modesty, which we're going to go into a little bit more detail, there's no issue there. Okay, that's the general clothing. Men's dress. So men are required to cover at minimum from the navel, the belly button, the navel to the knee. This includes the knees, meaning the knees have to be covered, but it does not include the navel. Okay. Imam Shafi'i said the exact opposite. So he said the knees don't have to be covered, but the navel has to be covered. So you just you just flip it up. Imam Abu Hanifa, you just pull the shorts down. So basically that's the gap. Okay, it's like this, but it's generally across the board. That means that your thighs have to be covered. In terms of what is uncovered, if your knees or your navel are uncovered, then it's considered to be, according to the difference of opinion, it's considered to be, a minor fault. If your thighs are uncovered, then it's considered to be a more major fault. Meaning it's even more considered to be a sign of nakedness. And your private parts obviously are considered the greatest sign of. So there's 3 levels of nakedness, or 3 levels of what you need to cover, basically. So this clarifies this for you. The clothing must be opaque. Okay, opaque meaning it's not transparent, it's not see-through, such that you can, someone can actually see through it. And it should be loose enough not to portray any part of the body that has to be covered. So for a man, what part has to be covered? It's in the navel and the knee. So your thighs, the clothing should not be so tight that it's portraying like the entire body part. Okay, that's almost like like as if it wasn't covered. Wearing like spandex, or sometimes the really, really tight jeans have become in fashion nowadays. Maybe that could border on something along those lines. So just be careful with that, because Muslims are modest. So that's why, people who wear these longer things to cover, the reason they do that is to cover this area. But even if you wore like a loose type of pant or whatever it is, somewhat loose, there's some flexibility on this. But just understand that it shouldn't be tight. So what would be tight be? Just imagine any comic book superhero. Too tight. Okay? For some reason, they all wear spandex, right? Batman, Superman, X-Men, it's like the clothing of choice. So for a believer, that's a little bit too tight, because the thighs are showing there, okay? It's easy to, perhaps it's easy to fly, but not all of them fly, right? So, and then, wearing the underwear outside the clothing, I don't know. I'm not going to even try to figure out the reason behind that. It is prohibited for men to wear silk. Okay, men are not allowed to wear silk, especially if it's directly touching the skin. Okay, if it's directly touching the skin. Now that doesn't mean you just wear it, you say, okay, well I'm going to wear something right underneath and then I'm going to put it on top. Alright, that's generally the same thing wouldn't apply, because people wear silk because of its texture. So no one's generally going to be wearing, like a sweatshirt and then like a little piece of silk on top. Generally, I don't think that happens generally, unless there's for some decorative purposes. This could be different. So men are prohibited to wear silk if it's directly touching the skin, particularly. And the reason for it is because it's considered to be something that's effeminate, universally for the most part, and it's considered to be extremely luxurious material. A very expensive and luxurious material. It's meant particularly for women. Okay, so women are allowed to use that, but men are prohibited from doing that. However, a small amount of silk, such as a few inches, is considered to be overlooked. So if you had let's say this pocket was made of silk, and the rest of the garment was not made of silk, this is fine, because one, it's not touching, and two, it's just a small part of the garment, and it's just for a decorative purpose rather than the actual garment being of silk. So that would be overlooked because it's not actual clothing, it's a part of a clothing. It's fine for men to use silk as a pillow. So you can actually use a silk pillow, although probably not needed because it's expensive. You can use a silk sheet as well. And you can even use a silk blanket. Although I'm assuming it's not going to really keep you that warm. But either way, that's allowed because you're not actually considered to be wearing it. So it's different. Wearing silk when needed. So if there's a necessity that you need to wear silk, like let's say there's a sports competition, then it's allowed. Okay, it's allowed. Let's say you're running a marathon, and it just so happens that you need to wear a jersey that's made of silk because it's extremely light, and you're going to be wearing it for the competition, that's going to be fine. It's also allowed to wear a fabric that's a mixture of silk and non-silk, as long as the silk is less than 50%. Alright, so you have 60% polyester, 40% silk. That's not considered to be proper full silk, so therefore it's going to be okay. I came across a statement by a scholar who said that synthetic silk, whenever something says 100% silk, unless it says 100% real silk, then it's not real silk. I looked into that, and that's actually not correct. No, I researched it a lot, actually. And synthetic silk, interestingly enough, was originally nylon. In the 30s, they made nylon, 30s, 20s, something like that. They made nylon, and they called that to be synthetic silk because it had the texture. And then they started using it for military application because it absorbs water well. Then they made rayon, and then they started making other things, and these were all put in the category of what's called synthetic silk. But when you say 100% silk, it actually means that it's silk. Right? It doesn't mean that it's synthetic silk. Right? So that's just, as far as I was able to research, and I even checked the Al-Maghrib forums as well, people who were posting, because I got it from there. So anyways, just to avoid that issue. Ties as well falls in the same category, because the tie, one, is not touching your body directly. And number two, it's a thing that's kind of attached. It's not an actual garment or clothing. So therefore, even a silk tie, if it was 100% silk, would not be a problem. Okay? So gold. It's prohibited for men to wear gold. Okay? Whether that's white gold, and I'm assuming, is white gold actually platinum, or there's actually something called white gold? 100%. It's not platinum, right? It's actually white gold. Okay, good. So white gold or normal gold, it's prohibited for men to wear gold. This applies to jewelry. This applies to watches. It even applies to having weapons, which are made of gold, and you're going to be using them. However, a garment, clothing, that has some gold sewn into it is not prohibited. And something which is gold-plated is also not considered to be gold. So if you had a gold-plated pen, for example, or even a gold-plated watch, as long as it's generally okay, because it's not considered to be something extravagant or at that level of luxury. But my recommendation is, if it's giving the appearance to people that it's actual solid gold, then it's best to avoid it. But if you have a pen, for example, I don't think the average person would ever think that your entire pen is actually made of gold. Generally people in the society have an understanding that if this person has a gold-plated pen, that's a gold-plated pen. No one's, crazy enough or rich enough to actually have a gold pen, for example. So gold-plated is not going to count because it's not just the luster, it's a luster mixed with the amount of luxury in terms of the wealth of the gold itself. Women's dress. But all the other jewelry and everything is prohibited for men. Women's dress. So women are required to cover the entire body except their face and their hands, and Imam Abu Hanifa added, and their feet, in front of marriageable males. Okay, and we're going to talk about that afterwards. So anyone whom they can potentially marry, meaning that they don't have the blood closeness, like your husband and obviously your father and your brother and all of those people, you can never marry them. They're off limits for you. So those people, besides those people, in public with general people, women are required to cover everything except the hands, from here, the face, and we talked about the face in the previous class, the same parts that you wash during wudu, and the feet, according to Imam Abu Hanifa. The clothing also, same thing. The clothing must be opaque, meaning it should not be clear and see-through. Okay. Now, what does clear and see-through mean, by the way? What it means is that the average person, upon glancing at you, would not be able to see what's underneath. So I know that, especially in California, it gets hot in the summertime, and people wear these different types of hijabs or under hijabs or whatever it is, and sometimes it looks like it's almost a see-through material. It's almost like it's going through. But if the average person who's looking at you from an average distance cannot actually see through it, then it's not considered see-through, even though the material is see-through. But if they actually have to kind of zoom in and look at you in detail to see through, then it's something different. So it has to be opaque. It has to be loose enough to not portray any part of the body that must be covered. So this is also important. So now we're not only talking about the thighs like the men, we're talking particularly about the chest area, talking about the thighs as well, we're talking about other parts. So this unfortunately becomes a problem because clothing is sold at very, very tight. So generally people go and put the head cover on, but then the rest of the clothing becomes very, very tight and there's nothing coming on top of that to cover it. This actually is not a correct way of covering for women. So it has to be opaque and it has to be loose enough so that it's not portraying the body part. So this is important. It's prohibited for women to wear strong and enticing perfume substances. So strong perfume is prohibited, but light ones are actually okay. Okay, so there's probably some gray area between, but those perfumes which are really enticing and they're when somebody walks by, you can smell it from a mile away. I mean, really, it just stays there for quite a while. And the reason why most people do it is also due to attraction. So the intention, whether the intention is there or not, the intention of the perfume is pretty clear. But light ones are fine. So there's a misconception among women that they can't wear any type of perfume thing. So then they don't wear any deodorant or they don't wear any whatever, and they're sweating and all of that. And see, all the guys are laughing, but none of the sisters are really laughing because they know this becomes an issue. It's not that they can't wear something to smell decent, all right? It's that it should not be strong. And this is clearly in the books of fiqh. It is allowed for women to beautify their faces and their hands because those are the parts that can be shown. And according to Imam Abu Hanifa, the feet as well, with creams. So they're allowed to wear creams. They can wear nail polish as well because it's on the hands. They can wear henna, mehndi, henna, rings. They can wear rings, as many rings as they want to. Nose rings, eyeliner, other type of things. All of those things are allowed because they're on the parts which are going to be generally exposed as well. However, they should not be extremely attractive. Okay, they should not be to an extent where you're really becoming an object of, being looked at or getting extra attention. And all of that is culturally defined. Okay, that's culturally defined. So to give you an example, if you are in a very traditional part of the world, you wear some type of mascara or even eyeliner or something, and nobody else is doing that, you're really going to be noticed and you'll stick out in that community. That's something that you shouldn't be doing in that society. Now, if you live in another society where all the women are just decked out and they're putting their foundation and everything on 3 hours before going to school or going to work, and then you were to wear some light makeup or something like that, generally you're not going to be sticking out. The real temptation is coming from the other people. So it's culturally defined in terms of what is extremely attractive, what is seductive. There's the right word. Extremely seductive or whatever it is. So, and of course there's always going to be a gray area. So you kind of have to make a decision based upon your understanding and consult with other people. Consult with other people who you respect their modesty, and then you can figure out what the society is actually, what is the cultural norm. Sometimes cultural norms are not always clearly defined, but they have some definition. So that's beautification. Women shaving the head. Okay, there are some hadiths of the Prophet, peace be upon him, which prohibit women from actually shaving their heads, but those hadiths are actually weak. So it means that it goes back to depending on custom. Okay. Now, in our custom, I think in America, it's pretty clear. But imagine somebody's coming from a Buddhist custom, who's a monk, for example. Very different, right? So we should be careful of that. Men growing long hair, we talked about that. What is the length of the beard? Okay. What is the length of the beard? Ibn Hazm, he said that there's a consensus of scholars that the beard is wajib, which means it's necessary. And the definition, the minimum definition was what was on the beard, what was on the chin and the jawbones, like we talked about. However, scholars have differed in terms of what should the length of the beard actually be. So some of them have said that it should be, the minimum generally is defined as whatever is being defined as a beard. So whatever is culturally generally considered to be a beard, such that the hair is on the right places and everything, doesn't have to be extremely long, it's still going to be considered a beard. Those little pencil beards or whatever you call them, I'm not looking at you guys to find one, but those little ones, the little thin ones, they're like 1 inch across or something, not even one, like 1 millimeter or something like that. Those are generally not considered to be beards. Right? A goatee, for example, is generally not considered to be a beard, except in the Maliki school. Some Maliki scholars have said that the chin is sufficient. So that's fine, in their opinion. But the majority have said this is the minimum. Other scholars have said that it's recommended to grow it to a fist length. And fist length has either been defined by holding the top where your beard starts here and then making sure the fist goes underneath and you can trim under here. And other ones have said that you hold under your chin like this and then you cut underneath. That's why you see people with long beards, because they're taking that opinion and that position, which was the opinion of one of the companions. Other scholars, like very few, but some scholars have said you're not allowed to trim your beard at all. It has to just keep on growing. Okay? And that's why you have very long beards. But other scholars have said that you should not allow your beard to grow that long, and it should be trimmed, particularly if it's going to be looked down upon in the culture that, you're not taking care of it. So anyway, that's when it comes to beards. The eyebrows, okay? The plucking or trimming the eyebrows. There is a difference of opinion on this, actually. And the reason why there's a difference of opinion has to do with the reasoning behind the way that the hadith have actually come. So is it prohibited to thin or shape your eyebrows? There's lengthy discussion on this. And the most lenient school is the Maliki school on this issue. And they interpreted the hadith as saying this applied to women whose husbands had passed away, and they were prohibited from doing this. Whereas other people take the hadith at their literal value, and they say that it's something that's forbidden. So personally, I'm still undecided on this, but I can see the wisdom of that. We're actually going to be having a meeting of local scholars very soon to actually take a stance on this, inshallah, within the next 3 weeks or so. Burying fingernails and hair. So when you cut your fingernails and when you cut your hair, can you just throw it in the trash, or do you actually have to bury it in the ground? Some of the scholars have said that you have to bury it into the ground. And the reason why they said that was there are some narrations from the Prophet and from some of the companions that you're supposed to be burying them. And the reason or the explanation in those narrations is that because they've been cut off from your body, it's considered to be something dead. Like dead meat. If you take an animal cut off or something like that. But these narrations are actually all weak. Although some scholars still said that it's recommended. Like Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, Imam Nawawi, they still said it's recommended even though the narrations are not very strong. Okay? Tattoos we talked about. Temporary tattoos are perfectly fine as long as they're not permanent. If you have a tattoo and the tattoo is of something vulgar and you can't afford to get it removed, you get it modified so that it's not as vulgar. They can change it up for you. Yellow and red garments. Okay, so there are a bunch of different narrations about yellow and red garments not being allowed, but there's contradictory evidence showing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, also wore yellow and red garments. So therefore, pretty much all color garments are allowed, and it was those specific religious cultures or customs that prohibited that type of clothing. Is wearing green clothing special? Is anything special about the color green and wearing green clothing? Well, it's mentioned in the Quran that green will be the one of the colors of the garments of the people of paradise. So that's nice. Aisha, radiallahu anha, may Allah be pleased with her, she wore a green scarf one time to show you that there's different colors were worn as well. But there's nothing to say specifically that you have to wear any type of colored clothing, whether it's white, and there's statements of the Prophet about wearing white, or green, or whatever color it is. You can wear all of them, and the Prophet, peace upon him, used to wear different colors. So he didn't wear one specific color all the time. His turban was of different colors, and his clothing was of different colors. And his style of clothing also came from outside of Arabia. So it's important to understand that. Is silk allowed for medical reasons? Yes. So if you have a medical reason, you have scabies, or you have some kind of rash or whatever it is, and silk is the only thing that is not bothering you, you're allowed to wear that. And in fact, it was permitted for Zubair and Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, because they had skin condition at the time, they were suffering from itching, and they were allowed to wear that at the time. Long, loose clothing for men. So do men have to wear long and loose clothing in particular? Does their shirt have to be longer? The thing is, doesn't have to be a certain style as long as it's loose. Okay? Can men wear silver jewelry like chains and bracelets and rings? Okay? As long as the custom or the culture does not deem it to be effeminate, then they would be allowed to wear that. Although Imam Abu Hanifa considered it to be effeminate, so he prohibited it in his culture. Okay? Color of women's clothing, we talked about that as well. But when it comes to women's clothing, also remember, take the custom into consideration. So don't go to Saudi Arabia with the pink hijab. I'm telling you, don't do that. You may not even want to wear the white hijab while you're there, or blue hijab, because of what the custom is going to be. Depending on whether it's during Hajj time or during off-season where there's mostly Saudi people, you should take the local custom into consideration, even if it's not your culture and you're in somebody else's culture. What is the minimum that has to be covered from a woman in front of the people she's not allowed to marry, like her family, and in front of other women? And what about for men? So for men, is the same thing. Okay, so even the guys and the men, they should not be looking at the thighs of other guys. Okay, for women, the minimum is what we call the awra, meaning the minimum you have to cover. The minimum for the woman in front of another woman is what a man needs to cover. Okay, that's the minimum. So the first question that somebody's going to ask is what? What about the chest? Right? And actually, you'll find in many books of Islamic law that they didn't mandate that the chest had to be covered. Which means a few things. It could mean, I don't know exactly what it means. It could mean that not so much emphasis was placed on the chest in terms of beauty in those times. Could be one of the reasons. And the second, and this is a common question, is what if woman is breastfeeding her child in front of another woman? Is that considered to be something that's prohibited to be looked at? And they said, no, it doesn't have to be. Although they specified that the stomach area from the front and the back should be covered. That's the only other part that they specified outside of that. So it should go a little bit above. This stomach area behind the back, in front of women to women, should be covered. That's the only thing that they specified. So, bikini, for example, would not, be appropriate because the rest of it's not covered. But other type of swimsuits would, even if it's not covering the entire thing and it's all women's pool. Are there exceptions to the hijab? Yes, like medical reasons. So there's a good question somebody asked. I'm a Taekwondo champion. I'm going to a Taekwondo championship. And I have to wear the headgear in the competition. And I wear hijab, but they're not allowing me to wear the headgear with the hijab on. And I'm going to be in a public competition. So what do I do? And the reason why they why they forbid me from wearing the hijab is if you get kicked and you get knocked out, the doctor needs to come and be able to look inside your ear without taking off your helmet to see what's going on with you. So it's for medical purposes. So in that case, there's two things. One, it's there's a medical reason behind it. Number two, the helmet in Taekwondo, for example, is very padded, right? So if somebody's looking at you generally, they can barely see inside your ear, even though your ear is uncovered. They really can't see much. And three, seeing that small part of the ear is not exactly gonna cause maybe guys to be extremely attracted to you or something, depending on, maybe how fast you can kick or something like that. So because of that, that's an exception. That's an example, and you can apply analogy to some other situations which would be something along those lines. Okay, so it kind of gives you an understanding of how to think about it. Elderly women do not need to wear hijab. And who is an elderly woman? When she either has lost her desire for men due to old age, or vice versa. Meaning that the men generally have lost their desire for someone in that age. Now you say, well, there's always some crazy guys out there, they have a fetish and all of that. That generally speaking, vast majority of people would not be interested in somebody of that age. So therefore, it's not a requirement for them to be wearing hijab fully. But maybe if they wore, partial, or they wore just kind of for stylistic purposes or whatever, that would be a nice thing. What about the hijab swimsuit? Or the burqini? Or there's different names for it, right? The hijab swimsuits and all of that. The thing is, as long as it's loose enough, and it stays loose enough, then it's fine. And from what I've seen, among the best hijab swimsuits that are coming out happen to be from Turkey. Turkish ones happen to be the best, and their variety is just ridiculous. There's hundreds, literally hundreds of different styles, and all of them take into consideration that when they take into consideration the material so that it doesn't stick, and the places where it would stick, they have another layer going on top of that so it doesn't stick. I mean, it's very, very well planned out. And so as long as it fits the criteria, it's fine. The purpose of hijab, safeguard from temptation, safeguard from immoral stares. It serves as an identity, and it also helps to protect the gaze of men. The four main reasons. False eyelashes. What about wearing false eyelashes? It falls in the same category as eyeliner, as long as you're not doing it to deceive somebody else, like a future spouse or something along those lines. Of course, if your spouse is not marrying you due to the shortness of your eyelashes, then he has a problem. You probably should not be marrying him, but you should not be deceiving him at the same time, right? Piercing your navel, or body piercings in other parts of the body. This is something that actually was debated at the last AMJA conference last year. American Muslim Jurists Association. And there were some interesting papers presented. But in conclusion, I think that this is probably, I think it's a pretty safe opinion that as long as there's no harm to your body, then it's okay to pierce those regions. So one example of that harm would be tongue rings. Okay, because we had a dentist present, Ahmed Sobo, some of you know him, and he gave a good research paper about how the tongue rings are actually causing mouth cancer in many patients because of one of the chemical, I forgot if it was mercury or whatever it was. Because of the presence of that, within 5 to 10 years, most people are actually getting some type of illness or mouth cancer or something along those lines due to the tongue rings that they have. Okay? Mahram men, it's the same, but she basically can expose, this is what they say, this is general advice that they're giving. Sleeves up to like here, shouldn't be up to the shoulders, sleeves up to here, hair and everything, pants to the knees. So yeah, basically from like the knees, and this area should be covered up to around this area. But the exception is, if there's a decent possibility of attraction with your uncle or your nephew who perhaps is around a similar age like you, then you should wear more to make sure that there's no unnecessary attraction or issue along those lines. Yeah, it definitely has a lot to do with culture. So you should always take your culture into consideration. So if you're going to be wearing low cut, tops or something like that in front of some of your family members, and there's not a big age gap between them, and there's an issue of, potential attraction, or this guy, is frustrated and he needs to get married or whatever it is, you don't want to be doing something like that. So you should always go a little bit above to prevent that from happening. So you should be a little bit extra careful. Can you swim with your mahram in the pool? It'll be the same clothing regulations. So depending on what clothing regulations are appropriate, that would be the same. So if you're covering the right things that you need to cover in front of your mahram, like your father or your brother, no, there's no restriction. Also, one last thing I forgot to add is that husband and wife, what are they prohibited from looking at? Okay? And the answer is nothing. Nothing. And the reason why I'm saying this is there are actually cultures who think that they need to cover in front of their own spouse as well. No, I'm serious. You'd be surprised. You find it in Turkey. I've heard about it. And you found it in Arabia. There was a ridiculous article. Came in Arab news that... ridiculous article. A woman divorced her husband, whom she had kids with. She went to the court and said, I want a divorce. I want to be released from this guy. And they've been married for like 20, 25 years with kids. Why did she apply for divorce? Because she used to cover her face always. Always. And one day while she was sleeping, he actually wanted to see what his wife looked like. And he opened her veil and she divorced him. This is Bedouin culture. Very rare in Arabia, but it's there. It's there. Doesn't mean that it's Islamically sanctioned. Okay, so it's very, very important. No, well, I said even for the men, it's okay. I'm saying even for the men, all colors are okay. I'm saying there are certain hadiths that talk about it, but yeah, they're okay. All the colors are fine for both. Okay, so nail polish can go on the fingers again because it's your hand. Like henna on your hand, for example. But if it's going to be, it's culturally dependent in terms of how attractive it's going to be. We're talking about praying. Okay, yeah, that's another issue. In terms of praying, general nail polish prevents water from getting underneath. So therefore, you should not be using it. So you have to take off the nail polish before, and you actually have to get the water underneath, and then put the nail polish back on. So it's not your prayer is not accepted. It's your wudu is not accepted. So if you make wudu and then you put the nail polish on, your prayer is accepted. So it doesn't last forever. So you have to make wudu. When you make wudu again, you remove it and then you put it back on. No, they're not like socks. No. The analogy of socks, some few modern scholars have applied analogy of socks, but I find it to be really, really weak. Otherwise, you can use gloves. And apply the analogy of socks too. So I'm wearing gloves because it's snow, and I'm at Big Bear playing around in the snow, and therefore I'm just going to wipe over my gloves. But you wouldn't do that. So why the nails? So it's not a very good analogy. I guarantee you, no matter what I say or how I explain it, someone will come and say something anyways. I gave a talk at Yorba Linda explaining the same thing I explained about meat. And somehow the entire community, or not the entire community, one group of the community walked out, and I hear from my brother that, you know what, you gave a talk saying that you can eat McDonald's. I said, whoa, I don't know where in the world that came from. I gave the exact opposite opinion. So no matter what happens, one person, Shaykh Yasir Qadi, was in a Al-Maghrib class talking about meat. And he mentioned, and he was talking about catfish. And he said it would be ridiculous to say that catfish is haram. And somebody was probably not listening to the first half of the sentence. And they heard catfish is haram. And they wrote it down. And their parents complained to me, why are you sending people to these kind of ridiculous places saying that catfish is haram? So no matter what I say, I know I'll be more careful, inshallah. But in the end, no matter what I say, someone will not take notes properly. That's why I have notes written down. So it's in documented writing that no, I didn't say something against my own notes. Yeah, but that's illa ma zahara minha, except what is apparent of it. So this light makeup, okay, light makeup which is not going to be considered attractive falls into the category of that verse. I'm telling you what the Muslim scholars have said. Right? I'm not coming up with just the direct detail. The thing that they've said is when it comes to excessive beauty or something that's going to be above and beyond, that's going to be something else. Okay, so the scholars have basically given a diverse views on what amount of makeup can be used and which parts can it be specified. Some specify only this part and this part can be touched. Other ones said, look, it's general. It's talking about general beauty as a whole. So the thing is, it's something that people, they're going to have to make educated decisions, and they're going to have to learn how to make educated decisions. All right. So my advice is that just you be careful with how much you're using. You don't go excess, and don't do something which is really going to be extremely attractive. That's going to almost be taking away the concept of the hijab for you in the first place. Agreed. Yeah. There's a lot of styles of makeup which, especially in today, in America, people have this romantic view of Oriental cultures and everything. They may actually find that more attractive than someone who's not wearing that. All right, so we should be very careful when it comes to that. Okay. Here's a very good question. So if you come from another country and you live here, what is your local custom? In that sense, my advice would be you take both customs into consideration and you play it safe. Because you're going to be in an American gathering at work, at school, and then you're going to be in a cultural gathering when you're meeting with your friends and stuff. So you should apply double culture. Either you can change it from that gathering to this gathering, or you apply it generally to stay consistent and don't wear something you shouldn't be wearing in that gathering, and don't wear something you shouldn't be wearing in that gathering as well. So yeah, no, leather under all conditions can be worn because it's always tanned, with the exception of pig leather. Yes, so transgender is a very good question actually. So being transgender in LGBTQ community is really pushing this, and in fact there was a lawsuit from the ACLU recently that one of the middle school people, I don't want to say guy because he wanted to become a girl. So he dressed like a girl and he wanted access to the women's locker room and the women's shower and the women's bathrooms and all of that. Even though he's 100% physically a guy, he chose to dress the other way because he felt that he feels more like a girl, even though physically he's a guy. What is the wisdom behind that? Right? Why does Allah say not to resemble the opposite gender? The reason behind it is very similar to the reason behind hijab. It's that men and women are created differently. They're physically created differently, and their desires are a little bit different. In terms of attraction is going to be different, and Islam wants to maintain the line between the genders. Because if the line is not maintained, what's going to happen is society is going to start getting messed up. It's not going to be able to, marriage will become a problem, relationships will become a problem, and this is a perfect example. This lawsuit is a perfect example. So let's say that a friend of mine or somebody I know, they decide just one day that I'm going to go to high school, and today I'm going to dress up like a girl. I should have access to the girls' locker room and the girls' shower. Just imagine, right? Would you want that? No. But if you don't keep the line, there, these are the kind of things that can happen. So you don't know who's legitimately crossing over and who's not crossing over, whether they're feeling or they're not feeling. That's why Islam keeps a very solid line. Now, if somebody has a physical issue where they're actually, there's actually debate, where they're not just they're feeling, but they actually have an issue in terms of physically, they have a different part, or they have whatever it is. Scholars have an entire chapter in Islamic law dedicated just to that and determining what they do, because it's going to determine what. See, another reason why gender is so important to keep separate, because your responsibilities are going to be different in terms of caring for your family. So taking care of your family, in terms of the work you're going to be doing, in terms of how much inheritance you're going to be receiving, in terms of so many things, in terms of how much dress you should be wearing. So many things differentiate from men and women in terms of rulings and things we do in daily life. That's why it's very, very important. So the first question about today, do sisters still need to cover their hair, or can they just dress modestly? The answer is yes, it still applies today, because the definition of modest dress doesn't change, because this is the bare minimum. The bare minimum criteria of what is considered modest in Islam. Adding something extra to that, like covering the face, or choosing a certain color like gray or black or dark colors or something like that, that's a culturally contextual additional variable of modesty. But the bare minimum is what we've defined, and that doesn't change with custom or time, because the thing is, if you're being forced, right, this can be something different. In America, nobody's forced, right? The circumstances of France, the circumstances of Tunisia, and the circumstances of Turkey, three countries are the only three countries that have actually banned hijab in certain public places, as far as I know. Is there another one? No, that's it. So these three, historically, France still has it, Tunisia dropped it, Turkey dropped it, alhamdulillah. There could be certain rulings, but it depends on the context. So for example, in Turkey, women were not allowed to go to university. Is that right? Yeah. Not high school, but university was okay? Both. So no high school, no university with hijab. So the question then arises is, what is the potential for an alternative schooling system in France or in Turkey? So do the women, what's going to happen if the women don't go to school? Is there an alternative school? Do the Muslims have the ability to make another school? How important is it for them to have an education to survive in that society? All these variables are taken into consideration. So it depends on the context, really. If there's no context like in America and you have the freedom, then yeah, it remains a requirement. The second question is a very good question. Okay, so black dye hair for men. So there's hadith that talks about you can change gray hair to any color except black. And that was particular to the father of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and there are some other reports that mention black. So the Shafi'i school, and I think maybe one other school, said that you can dye your hair any color, but you're not allowed to use black, based upon that hadith. But the other schools have said that was specific to one person, and it does not apply across the board. So therefore, even black would be used, and that seems to make more sense to me, because if you're avoiding black, and you happen to have brown hair, and another person has black hair, so why does the person who has brown hair, who has gray hair, is allowed to use that, or someone who has blonde hair is allowed to go back with blonde, but only the guy with black hair is the one that kind of gets, the only guy who can't change it back. So that's why I think the interpretation of the black hair with the other madhabs is, I think it's a stronger opinion. Yeah. So even the ones who took the position that you shouldn't use black, they said in battle or in war or something, you should use it to make yourself look younger, so that you can intimidate. Otherwise, you're gonna look like an old person. They're gonna say, "Oh, you're not gonna win the battle. These old guys, we're gonna take them out." So this problem. So the wedding ring, some people said that we're putting it on this finger. It's a Christian tradition, and it signifies the third finger from the Trinity or something along those lines. I looked into it a lot. And what actually happened is that Christians adopted this later on, and some of them did make it part of their religion, or part of their, part of their Christian culture. But they're not the ones who invented it. So the rings did exist much earlier than that, in the Greek times, and I forgot before that even. So the thing is, to say that that culture, one, it doesn't apply today, and two, it didn't originate with Christianity. It originated before Christianity. So therefore, I don't think this would be a problem. So if it was clear cut that was the origin, there could be an issue. But because it's not clear cut, at least from what I've researched, I don't think there's going to be an issue. No, because it's not specific to them. Because wearing a ring is not specific to them. So it's become a universal thing. Whether we like it or how it became a universal thing or whatever, it's already a universal thing. So because when it's pretty much something that's universal, and it has nothing to do particularly with their religion. So if you ask any Christian, you go to even the priest, you go to even the pastor, and you say, well, what is the significance of this finger? Most of them won't give you this explanation. It was something that a Christian group did in history, but didn't represent the majority of Christians, nor does it represent the majority of Christians today. Now, doing the vows is definitely a Christian thing. And the way that the rings are exchanged is something that the wording and the style of it still has a Christian connotation. So that would be imitating the kuffar. That would be imitating the disbelievers. But the actual ring itself, depending on what kind of style ring it is and all that, generally wouldn't fall into the same category. Because it's not specific to the religion. Anytime it does become specific to the religion, then it would be prohibited. Yeah, I even asked Shaykh Faqih this question. So he says that it would probably be best not to wear it, or wear it on a different finger, with the exception of if you already have it, and he said it's best not to even wear the rings, except in this society where if you don't wear a ring, then people will assume that you're not married. And then it becomes an issue, and you get a proposal or whatever else happens. So you don't want the assumptions also being made about you. So it's not a problem if you wear it. If you had a reason for wearing it or a reason for avoiding it, it's fine to act upon that. Otherwise, there's no prohibition, clearly, or there's no reason why you have to wear it either. Being in front of non-Muslims. Yeah, so the reason about clothing requirements for sisters particularly, in front of non-Muslims, was that it was understood that you're not sure if you can trust them, that they're going to be describing your attractive features to other people. So if we take that same fatwa into consideration, anyone who's of a immoral character, Muslim or non-Muslim, such that you think that they're going to go and start telling other people about, you know what, this sister, her hair is like this and her hair is like that, and she starts going and describing it to other people, you don't want that. So you should be careful around those kind of people. Right? So you should have the same kind of, and what they said was, if you're around them, you should wear normal hijab as if you're around a man. So I think that not only applies to non-Muslims, it applies to Muslims who have those characteristics. But does it apply to all non-Muslims? I would say no. Because there are other non-Muslims who are very trustworthy, they're very honest, and they're not going to do something like that. They respect your hijab and everything. So in front of them, I think there's leniency there. But you have to be careful about who you're doing it. And another thing I'm going to mention is, for the sisters, you need to be very careful today, because everyone has a cell phone with their camera. And everyone just takes pictures non-stop. So any place you go, any gathering you go, any function or whatever you guys want to call it, a party or gathering you go to, and people are taking pictures, not everyone's going to respect that you don't want that posted on Facebook. And it's going to be posted on Facebook. So nowadays, due to the cameras, you need to be extra careful. Because I've heard so many sisters got their picture taken and it was posted on Facebook or Instagram, right? Or one of those other ones. So be very, very careful about that. And brothers, you don't have the awra issue, but when you're doing foolish things and people take a picture of you and they post it on Facebook, it's going to be very difficult for you to get married. So I'm just letting you know that, inshallah. All right. Oh, a very good question. So what do you do if your husband is not allowing you to wear hijab? Okay. The Short answer, there's a short answer and then there's a long answer. The short answer is, your obedience to Allah takes precedence over your obedience to your husband. Okay? The longer answer is, there can be some exceptions. And the exception would be something along the lines of, you're married, you have several children, you just started practicing, your husband has not been influenced yet to start practicing Islam, he still needs some time, or the kids are going to get lost. If you get divorced, your husband will divorce you if you don't start wearing hijab. Something along those lines where it just needs a little bit more time, or it's going to cause more harm to a lot of people. If you do this right now, then there can be an exception to the rule. Okay, so it really requires some deeper insight. Okay, otherwise the general rule is obedience to Allah takes precedence over the husband. Can a husband force his wife to wear the hijab? And in reality, the answer is yes. Yes. The reason why is because it's his obligation to make sure that she's covering herself properly. The same way it's his obligation to provide for her, the same way it's his obligation to make sure that his children are also not doing something that's against Islam. Right? So now, can you enforce sincerity on them? No. But anything that applies to the family, yes, you have a responsibility. Okay? Now again, the husband, when it comes to that, if he just started practicing, and she didn't start practicing yet because he heard the lecture and she didn't hear the lecture, and he got motivated, she didn't get motivated, you need to use wisdom. And there's a way of, now should men just go and start telling you better do it from now on? That's not the way. That's not the way, obviously. You explain it, you try to convince them, you give them time, you get them in good company, it's different. But in the end, in terms of the aspect of, if she says, I don't want to do it, and he says, no, you're going to do it, he does have that authority. Okay? Niqab is something that early scholars said is not mandatory. And later scholars, some of them came and they said that it should be mandatory to prevent, I'm trying to translate fitna, problems in the community and unnecessary glances or excessive glances and all of that, because there's become a problem in the... So the thing is, so there's, the basis for it has to do with taking an extra precaution due to circumstances in the community, okay? In the society, right? Now here's a good question, a very pertinent question, which is not really in this part of the class, but if the male has an opinion on what is the correct opinion on something, and the female has a different opinion on what is the correct opinion, and it's a family issue, what should happen in that case? So if the husband says, I take the opinion of the later Shafi'i and Hanbali scholars who say that niqab is mandatory, and the woman says, no, I take the opinion of the early scholars which says it's not mandatory, what do you do in that case? You make an appointment with Shaykh Faqih for counseling, and we will deal with your case on an individual basis, inshallah. Alright. So, vows and oaths. So what is a vow? A vow is when somebody makes an act of obedience to Allah, mandatory on themselves. So you say that, for example, you say, I vow, alright, I'm vowing that I will fast an entire month. I promise that I'm going to fast for an entire month. Or someone says, I promise that I'm going to pray 8 units of prayer extra. What are you doing? You're doing this generally to discipline yourself. Because if you just say, you know what, I need to pray more, you're not going to actually do it. You're not going to get around to it. When you make this vow, right, you're going to stick around to it, you're going to get it done. So this is one of the reasons why people do it, and there's a benefit in doing that. Usually though, people throw a condition in there. And this is when it becomes a little of an issue. So that's a unconditional vow. Then other people throw in this condition. They say, you know what, if Allah cures me of this illness, I'm going to go for Hajj. Or they say, if Allah gives me 100% on my CIS test, I'm going to give $100 in charity. Right? So now the question is, when you do something like that, Do you have to fulfill the vows if it happens? Yes. If it happens, you have to fulfill the vow as well. You have to do it. You can't just say, oh, well, I didn't mean it or whatever. But the thing is this. The intention when you make a vow like this should be that you're thanking Allah for the blessing. Yet you're thanking Allah. You're not doing it in order to hasten what was going to happen. So you see, there's two different things. It's very important to differentiate between them. One of them is if you do this, you say, you know what? Oh Allah, if I get a perfect score, I'm going to give $100 in charity. Just as a way of just thanking you, an extra thing. As long as it's very clear in your mind that your vow is not helping you at all to get the perfect score. Because the vow does not help you. Because you cannot make deals with Allah in order to help you. So you say, you know what? I didn't get a perfect score. And the other guy got a perfect score. Man, I should have done this. I should have made a promise. I'm going to give $100 in charity. I would have gotten the perfect score too. You can never say that or think that. So this is what's called hastening the occurrence of the condition. Right? You're trying to get the thing to happen. And actually the Prophet ﷺ, he clarified this very clearly. And he said, these conditional vows, when you think in your mind that they're going to somehow benefit you, he says, these things only extract good deeds from misers. Does it mean people who are cheap and they don't want to give? It just helps get those people to give something out. But it's not helping the actual action to happen. Because that's like bargaining with Allah. You know, okay, Allah, I want you to cure me. Okay, I vow $100. No, you know what? Just to make sure that I get cured, I'm gonna up it to 1,000. How can you do that with Allah? It's Allah's if Allah decides from His will to cure you, He's gonna cure you. And if He decides not to cure you, your money, Allah doesn't need your money. So your money is not helping you to get the cure. Understand? But if you did it out of a state of thankfulness, then it's allowed and it's binding. My personal opinion is that many people in our culture, this is my observation, in our culture, they understand the second. They think that it actually helps them out. So my advice is, it's best not to make these vows at all. Unless you're very, very clear in your mind that it's only thanking Allah and it's not doing anything else. If something happens, just go and give the charity instead of making the vow. If you get the good grade, just go and give the charity instead of thinking about it and think, should I go with 100? Should I go with 200? Don't think about that. Think about it after you get the good grade. All right, and then you can thank Allah for that. So the following conditions are required for a vow to be binding on a person. So when you make this promise, when is it binding? You have to be mature and you have to be sane, a responsible person, right? Obviously. So if you're a kid and you make a vow, I swear, I promise I'm going to give $1 million in charity. As soon as I hit age of 18, I'm going to give $1 million in charity. And then all of a sudden you hit 18 and you're like, do I have to fulfill that vow? No, you don't, because you were a little kid. When you made that, you didn't know what you were doing. Number 2, it has to be for an act of obedience to Allah. Okay, it's not for random things. A vow is for an act of obedience. For example, if you make a vow that you're going to build a masjid, act of obedience to Allah. You make a vow that you're going to visit the sick person. It's an act of obedience to Allah. And then there's some difference of opinion on that. So if somebody vows to commit a sin, say, I vow I'm going to drink wine one of these days. Or I'm going to try marijuana one of these days. That vow is not binding. And you must refrain from it. And people try and justify sin. I promised my friend I would just try it once. And I have to fulfill my promise. No, you don't have to fulfill your promise. You're not supposed to fulfill your promise. Okay? People get confused about that. But if it's not for an act of obedience to Allah and it's something random, like somebody vows, I vow I'm never going to get married. I make a vow I'm never going to get married. Or someone says I'm going to stand up the entire day. Or somebody says I'm never going to drink fruit juice. Okay? That vow is not valid because it's not an act of obedience. If somebody vowed to build a masjid, for example, and then they realize later on, you know what, it's better to build a school. They should break their vow and expiate. We're going to talk about expiation. So technically you already made a vow that you're going to make a masjid, and then later on you realize, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. We should have gone with the school instead. School is more needed right now. So technically you are breaking your vow. But in this case, because it's something better than the previous one, you should break it. Should meaning you don't have to, but it's not wrong to, but you should. It's recommended that you break it and do the better thing. Okay? So that's the way vow works. But you have to expiate when you break your vow, which we're going to talk about. Number 3, the vow has to be according to what is owned by you. And this is pretty obvious, right? So if you say, I'm going to give $1 million in charity, and you have $1,000 in charity, does your vow count or it doesn't count? It counts for your $1,000 because it goes up to the limit of what you have. So if you have less than that, it's going to count. If you vowed for more than that, it counts for less than that. So you got to give $1,000. It doesn't just nullify itself away. Okay? So some other things. If somebody made a conditional vow, and then either the condition was desired, either you wanted the condition to happen, or you didn't want it to happen. So for example, somebody says, oh Allah, if you cure me, then I'm going to give this money. You want to be cured, right? Now if somebody does the opposite, and they say, if I fail my exam, I'm going to stand up the entire day. It's a punishment for myself. Do you want to fail the exam? No. So you're trying to avert, so there's a condition that's desired and a condition that's not desired. So what do you do in that case? When something is not desired, then you get a choice. The choice is you can either fulfill the vow or you can break the vow and you can expiate. So what that means basically is, if you see, you're not actually, there's no sign of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if the other thing is happening, if you fail the condition. So if I fail this exam, I'm going to stand up all day as a punishment to myself. Okay, you punishing yourself after you failed the exam is not going to help your grades in the exam, right? It's not going to help you anymore. So now, you didn't want to fail, but you already failed. Now, is this really going to help you? It may help you to learn your lesson next time, or it may not help you to learn your lesson. In this case, you have the option to break or to fulfill. You want to stand up all day, you can stand up all day. The reason why scholars differentiate between the two is because one of them is an act of obedience to Allah, and the second one is just for like personal discipline. You're not benefiting at all. There's no obedience to Allah by doing something like this. So, and you didn't want it in the first place. So there's no problem if you break it. There's no issue if you break it. Vows are not bound by time or place. So if you make a vow, you say, I'm going to feed the poor people of Anaheim. Or I'm going to fast on a Monday. And then later on you say, you know what? I'm going to feed the poor people of Santa Ana instead of Anaheim. You can do that and there's nothing wrong with that. And you say, okay, I'm going to fast on Thursday instead of Monday. The main reason was the fasting or the feeding of the poor people. So it's not bound by a time or place, and you're not considered to be breaking your vow if you modify it, because the objective is still there. That's a vow. Now there's something called an oath. An oath is to confirm something while swearing by Allah. So when you say Wallahi, or you say I swear by Allah, I'm going to do such and such thing. It's different. What is the wisdom behind this? The wisdom behind this is similar. It encourages somebody to fulfill what they're going to say because they just took the name of Allah. So if somebody says, you know what, I swear by Allah, I'm going to do such and such thing. If you didn't have the swear by Allah, you don't have that extra motivation for you to actually do it. You say, oh, I didn't promise, or I didn't swear by Allah, so it's not such a big deal. So this motivates you and encourages you to make sure that you're going to get it done. Okay? And the person who's listening to you, he's also going to take you a lot more seriously. If I say, you know what, I told all of you students that you need to study at least 2 hours a week per class. And then someone says, okay, I'm going to try my best. That's different than, I swear by Allah, I'm going to do a minimum of 2 hours. Alright? Everyone ready to swear? No? Okay, but you should do it for yourself. At least make a vow or something like that. So, there's 3 types of oaths. There's a valid oath. An oath which counts and you have to fulfill it, or if you break it, you have to expiate. And expiation means you have to do something to fix it because you broke your vow. What is a valid oath? If you swear to do something or to avoid something in the future, so for example, you say, I swear by Allah, I'm never going to speak to that person again. Because that person is causing a problem, and you're trying to boycott them for their own benefit or whatever. Or you say, I swear by Allah, you swear by Allah, I will go and visit China. For some reason you have to go there. So I swear by Allah, I'm going to go to that place. That's a valid oath because you're swearing about something in the future. So it's binding, and if you don't go or you don't do that, then you have to expiate. You have to either fast or feed poor people or whatever. We're going to talk about that. But it's taken seriously. So if you swear by Allah, you say, I swear by Allah, I'm gonna visit you in your new house. And you don't go and visit the guy in his new house, you have to expiate. You're breaking your oath. So this is number one. Number two, a mistaken oath. If you swear about something in the past and you assume that it was true and it turned out to not be true, then you violated this oath. So for example, somebody comes and asks you, can I borrow $5? He says, I don't have any money on me. I say, come on man, I know you got the money. He said, no, I swear to Allah, I don't have my wallet on me. I forgot my wallet at home. And then later on, you realize you put your wallet in the back pocket. You totally forgot. So you swore by Allah about something in the past, but in reality, you didn't know. You thought it to be true. Are you going to be held accountable? This is the real issue here. Are you going to be held accountable in front of Allah for swearing about something which you actually didn't know? And the answer is no, because this is a mistaken oath. You didn't know, therefore you're not going to be held accountable. That's one type of mistaken oath. The second type is the habitual wallahi. Wallahi this, wallahi that, wallahi I don't have this, wallahi So people do this all the time, and sometimes you're going to find them lying, technically lying. So for example, someone comes and says, why don't you eat with me? No, wallahi I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to eat. Until Muhammad comes, wallahi I'm not going to touch this food. And then 20 minutes later, Muhammad's not coming. You say, man, I'm hungry. I'm going to eat. The question is, did you just break your vow? Did you break your oath? Do you have to expiate? Do you have to be penalized for this? The answer is no. Because this is considered to be a mistaken oath. Those oaths which are habitual and the person has no intention of making the oath. So you didn't make the oath as an oath. You made it as an emphasis. Then it's okay. If you made it as a real oath with the intention, then you have to expiate. Okay, that's number two. So it's neither considered a lie, nor is it binding on the person. Oath number three is a false oath. Al-Yamin al-Ghamus. This is a major issue. This is to swear about something in the past. When you say I swear by Allah, I don't have my wallet. And you got your wallet in your pocket and you know it. And you're swearing intentionally. This is a major sin. It's not just a lie, but you're lying by using Allah as a witness. This is a major, major sin. Okay, so someone comes and says, did you sell this person this car? I swear by Allah, I didn't sell him the car. And you sold him the car and you know it. This is a major, major sin. And in fact, the sin is so bad that there's no expiation. You don't need to feed any poor people. You don't need to do anything, because doing all of that was just as a self-discipline for you. This is so bad, it's not going to help you at all. So that you don't even expiate. Allah doesn't need you to feed anybody. He doesn't need you to clothe anybody. The only way this can ever be forgiven is if you sincerely, sincerely repent to Allah and you correct the mistake. So if you ripped off somebody, this is very common unfortunately, when people rip somebody off, they swear by Allah to convince the other person to leave them alone. And if you rip somebody off and you stole their money and you swear by Allah, you can't just say, okay, oh Allah, I've really sincerely repented, oh Allah, forgive me. And then you keep the money in your pocket. You have to return the money back as well. So you have to rectify the situation. This is a major, major sin. And you should be very, very careful about this. What is the wording of the oath? So what constitutes an oath and what doesn't constitute an oath? The wording has to be that you swear, or you swear by Allah One of the names of Allah, you say, I swear by Allah. One of the names of Allah, I swear by Ar-Rahman. Or I swear by Al-Qawi. One of the names of Allah. Or one of the attributes of Allah. Whatever attribute it is. So for example, somebody says, I swear by the greatness of the merciful. That also counts. And all of these wordings are culturally conditioned. So it depends on your custom and the way that you are, the way that people swear in your culture. It is unlawful. It is not allowed for a Muslim to swear by anything besides Allah. So you're not allowed to swear by the Prophet. You're not allowed to swear by the Kaaba. You're not allowed to swear by your parents. And this is very common among like high school kids, right? I swear by my grandfather's blah blah blah, this and that. None of that applies. Muslims should not be doing that. You only swear by Allah. You don't swear by anything else. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sworn by many other things in the Quran. So somebody says, well, Allah swore by wal fajr and wal asr. So how about I start swearing by time and I start swearing by that? That's for the Creator because He created those things. You're the creation. For the creation, you only swear by the Creator and you don't swear by anyone else. So the intention of a vow. If somebody, this is like enforced cases. If somebody forces you or pressures you to swear regarding something, so I want you to swear by Allah that you're going to come and eat at my house or something like that, right? If somebody forces you or pressures you or whatever it is, and you try to get out of it by using a twist on words. This is quite common, right? Somebody says, you know what? Okay, I will come. And then in their mind, if they add like a condition in their mind, like if elephants start flying, something like that, right? Yeah, I'm not going to come. So they're trying to get out of it somehow. Whose intention matters? That's the question. So if you use a play on words, whose intention matters? All right? So for example, somebody says, you know what? I want you to eat this food. And they're pointing at a plate. All right? And you say, okay, I swear by Allah, I'm going to eat that food. And that referred to not this food, but the other food. Right? So there's like a chocolate on the table and there's vegetables on the table. You say, I swear by Allah, I'm going to eat that food. And you said, well, my intention was, I was talking about the chocolate. I wasn't talking about the vegetables. Whose intention counts? The intention of the person who asked you to take the oath counts. Or what the person is hearing is the intention that counts, except in one case. And that case is when there's oppression. It's like the exception to the rule of lying we talked about before. So in a case of oppression, your intention counts and not the other person's intention. So if somebody comes and they're military and they're about to, they're trying to kill you and killing the people of the city, and you happen to have some guns hidden, and they say, look, do you have any weapons? Swear by Allah that you don't have any weapons. And he says, okay, I swear by Allah, I don't have any weapons. In your mind, you're saying, I don't have any weapons in my hand right now. Right? But I got some weapons underneath this, underneath this carpet. So I swear by Allah, in cases of oppression, it's an exception to the rule. So it's okay. So you don't need to expiate. But if you don't eat the vegetables, for example, you have to expiate. If a cause changes, so if you swear by Allah, I'm not going to speak to this guy anymore. I'm not going to hang around with this guy anymore. I swear by Allah because this guy is a bad influence over me. I swear by Allah, I'm never going to go out with him again. Anytime he comes to pick me up from the house, I'm not getting in the car with that guy. He's a bad influence. But then, the guy changes. He completely changes his life around. Now your oath is not binding anymore because the reason why you were avoiding him is to not get affected. So you don't need to expiate. So what is expiation? Last thing. What is expiation? Expiation, if you break a vow or you break an oath, you have to expiate. And this is in the Quran. So what do? You have three options. Either you feed 10 poor people. You have to feed 10 poor people at least 2 meals. Because that's, people need at least 2 meals to feed off of a day. And this is like nice meals, just general average meals. 10 people, which will suffice them. And if you don't feed them, you can give them the money equivalent of this so that they can feed themselves. But let them know this is for food. Option number 1. Option number 2, give 10 poor people a set of clothing. Not a shirt or a pant, not a garment, a set of clothing. So if you give them one of those long thobes, that's sufficient. If you give them a shirt, you need to give them a pant as well. So a full set of clothing, which the scholars say should at least cover them for prayer. So if you're giving it to a woman, something that actually will cover her completely for prayer. Option number 2. Option number 3, you free a slave. And this can be a slave, it can be a male or female, it can be a Muslim or a non-Muslim. Now I know we have no slaves generally, right, to free, but I think it's interesting that Islam put this ruling, even non-Muslims will be freed when somebody's making an oath. So the more people make oaths and start breaking them in society, Muslim and non-Muslim slaves become free. So when people talk about slaves and all of that, this system, man, can you imagine if this existed in America during the slave trade? We wouldn't have such a big issue, right? But so Islam has set up systems to get rid of slaves, to free them. And the thing is, slaves, by the way, in the Islamic context, unlike the American context, are prisoners of war who come in through war. So it's completely different. So anyways, you have to choose one of these 3 options. If you can't fulfill any one of these 3, because you don't have the money, or you can't find any people who are qualified for this, then, and only then, do you fast 3 days in a row. Okay? A lot of people I know that they hear, oh, you can fast 3 days in a row. Okay, I broke my oath, I'm going to fast 3 days. No. So you do one of these 3 things, and if you can't do it, then you fast 3 days in a row. Okay? And we'll take questions on this next week. So we'll conclude here, inshallah. Don't forget to study for the exam. We ask Allah to help us and guide us at all times. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wassalamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.